All right. Well, actually, let's do it right now. All the way across so much water we go to connect now with Terence Mckenna, who's safely tucked away, I think the side of a volcano or something, isn't it, Terence?
That's right, Art. How are you this evening?
I'm fine. God, it's great to hear your voice again. It really
yes,
is.
I think it's been about a year.
It's been about a year. That's right. I'm curious. Don't hold back. I'm sure that you have been watching or at least listening to or vaguely aware of what we're doing in Europe right now. And I thought I'd probably start out by asking you your comments.
Well, I'm glad I listened in on your reading of your statement, so I know where you're coming from. Well, as you said, it's a complete mess. For the third time in the 20th century, the Balkans appear to be the place where Europe could potentially
Explode.
push itself into some kind of war nobody could foresee the end of. I read analysis of Milosevic and his regime 5 years ago that predicted this would be the end game, that Kosovo was where push would come to shove, and now here we are. There's only a few months left in the 20th century, but time for one more atrocity, apparently.
Apparently. And now I understand, by the way, Terence, late news, there are seven Russian warships on the way to the area to, they say, observe, but I don't know. You get 7 Russian warships, and of course the Russians are not at all happy with us. They've been rattling all kinds of sabers about this, and it really it still happens. The old days of duck and cover, you remember that, Terence? Duck and cover?
Right. No, I think, Vietnam gave the domino theory a bad name, but I think in the Balkans, the domino theory may well have something to say. Watch Macedonia, watch Albania. As the destabilization spreads, Greece and Turkey could be pulled in. The Russians are beginning to move toward it. And don't think anyone is in control of all this, or as you say, what's the exit strategy? It's easy going in. Nobody knows how you get out of this kind of thing.
Yeah, we're throwing, of course, these cruise missiles, firing these cruise missiles, beginning to run out of them, incidentally, but we are firing what we have. When they run out, that means more airplanes, and then eventually, when that strategy fails, then you're faced with a choice of either retreating, and it's another Vietnam, or putting in ground troops and starting down the same horrible road of no return.
Well, and remember, ground troops couldn't make a difference in Vietnam either. Yes, I think aerial bombing, how many times in the 20th century are we going to learn that it's insufficient and it's a very weak-kneed approach if you're talking about all-out war with fascists?
And then, Terence, also, even if we did bomb them, which I suppose is conceivable, to the point where they said, okay, we'll talk about peace, and then we move peacekeepers. We're peacemakers now, not peacekeepers, but we finally get peacekeepers in there. There's no exit strategy at all. Look at Bosnia. They said we'd be there for a year and then a year and a half and then on and on and on. We never get out. And when we do finally leave, they will resume the same thing they were doing.
Yes, well, NATO seems to have become the kind of military arm of the world corporate state that many people feared.
Yes, sir. What the Serbs are doing, there's no way to countenance, but I'm not so sure I'm so happy with this new world of ours.
Well, as you say, you can't countenance what is happening in Kosovo. On the other hand, what happened in Rwanda, what happened in Cambodia, these things didn't raise anybody's radar.
No, it's really rarely does something politically grab me these days. I've been really bored to death with politics, especially the whole damn Monica thing. Thank God that seems to be over, maybe.
Well, you remember you and I talked when we were about 6 weeks into it last year, and I said that I didn't think this was going to bring happiness to the right wing.
Well, it didn't. It brought, as a matter of fact, it kind of tore the right wing all to pieces. And I don't know what's going to happen. It's going to be a very interesting election coming up. What do you think will happen?
Oh, I assume that if the Democrats can't win this one after what the country's been through, then they're probably finished. But I think it'll be an easy win for Gore. I think the Republicans are flirting at the end of the 20th century with the kind of fate the Whigs were looking at the end of the 18th century. They need a program and an agenda. Running against the president has gone about as far as it can go, I think.
That's right, and I think a lot of people are just running away from that one now. Well, how's it going there? I mean, but look, there's a whole new audience. I keep forgetting. I probably have 100 affiliates since the last time I talked to you. So maybe we ought to take a second, and you should tell everybody who Terence Mckenna is.
Who Terence Mckenna is.
That's right. If you were to have to answer that, which you do now, what would you say?
Well, I guess my bio says writer and explorer. Explorer means explorer of hallucinogenic plants, strange usages of exotic plants by exotic people, and then coming back and talking about these things, advocating them. Alteration of consciousness leads to all the big philosophical issues. What is culture? What is history? Where are we going? And how are we going to get there? And what's going to be so great about it when we get there? So I'm an itinerant philosopher at the end of the 20th century.
Well, the average Joe out there, maybe driving a truck, across Indiana somewhere, probably is saying to himself right now, well, why should I listen to anything emanating from this drug-scorched brain? But of course, that's the only problem with you, Terence, is your brain doesn't appear to be drug-scorched, and it should be. If what the establishment tells us about drugs is even partly true, you should be a basket case.
Well, maybe I am.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
But I think the guy driving his semi across Indiana, he may be a little scorched himself this time of night.
Well, he's scorched in a different way, trying to keep his eyes open, get the load delivered. That's right. No, you're absolutely right about it.
It's certainly true. The stereo of the cannabis enthusiast can't think straight, can't remember where they put the keys. I've never felt that way about these things. I think cultures choose the drugs they want to stigmatize, and then they glorify others, and it differs from culture to culture. The social consequences differ according to the choices made, but alteration of consciousness by human beings is as old as human beings themselves.
That's quite true. Do you think that it would be fair to suggest, it would be certainly something that would probably get us in a lot of trouble, but that there are some hallucinogenic drugs that do, in fact, give people legitimate, underline that word, insights that they would otherwise perhaps not realize?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you give me a lead-in to talk about one of the things I'm doing at the moment, which is after a conference in Mexico on hallucinogenic botany this year, a couple of friends of mine and I decided to organize a conference on the theme you just stated, a conference on the creative process and hallucinogenic substances, because there's a huge amount of the art, design, and fashion world that has for years been using these things to fuel the engines of creativity.
Precisely.
But it's all been in the closet and very...
Terence Mckenna is probably unlike anybody you're ever going to have the pleasure of listening to and meeting. Terence Mckenna really has picked up the gauntlet from Timothy Leary. And you may reject what he has to say, but at the very least, if you claim to have an open mind, you really, really must consider it. All right. Well, the old myth, is that try this. If you think your creativity is heightened when you're on some sort of hallucinogenic drug, then make notes, write a story, paint a painting, conduct some music, play some music, sing. and see if when you're down, it was really as good as when you were up. And that's kind of what we're talking about here, in a way, isn't it, Terence?
Yeah, well, most of us probably would come in on the low end of that scale, although there are some spectacular counterexamples. Samuel Taylor Coleridge wrote Kubla Khan, Stoned on Opium. The insight to the structure of the benzene molecule came to someone after a cognac-inspired dream. The character of creative breakthrough is like a revelation, the aha experience. Yes. And sometimes it's a bump on the head, and sometimes it's a hallucinogenic experience, but it always has the character of sort of arriving in a completed form. You know what I mean?
Yes. Why are there so many striking counter examples? Why? That's a question you never hear dealt with in the public. In fact, you never hear about it at all. They suppress that information. But why sometimes is a drug a key to creativity that you would not have otherwise? Why?
Well, I think it's because of the larger effect of these drugs, which is that they dissolve boundaries. And many of the boundaries which enclose us are boundaries of habit, convention, and under the influence of the drug, we see beyond those boundaries. The job of artists has always been to sort of be an antenna into the future, and bohemians have always been associated with drug taking to some degree. So I think it's a very understandable process. It's simply that we're now beginning to understand it, and we have to, because the number of substances available and being discovered all the time is beyond the power of the courts and the scientific establishment to really manage.
Well, I don't know. If you go to a doctor, you will notice these days, Terence, I don't know whether you ever go to doctors, but when you do, a doctor will say, you know what, I know you're in a terrible amount of pain, and I really wish that I could prescribe more to keep you out of pain, because that's the way a doctor feels. You know, they're trying to ease your suffering, but the doctor will tell you, frankly, the DEA is looking right behind my shoulder, and a number of my colleagues have lost their licenses, and so, frankly, I can't really give you what you need. That's prescribed.
No, well, this is a part of the drug problem. The hysteria on drugs has made so many different people and institutions crazy in so many different ways. I really, on the general larger question of hard drugs, I'm quite despairing because so many people and institutions make money off the present mess.
Yes.
You know, the prison builders, the rehab people, the criminal syndicates, the bought-off cops, the paid-off judges. Everybody is making money on this racket that they pretend to wring their hands over.
That's absolutely correct. And heaven knows what the police would do if they couldn't chase narcotics people. They would literally have about 10% or 20% at most of their job left. And I think our prisons would be more or less about 60 or 70% empty as compared to their present content.
The courts would unclog and lawyers would have to find honest work.
So in other words, it's never going to happen.
You got it, Art.
Well, what are you doing in terms of researching this interesting, creative truth? How are you going to do that?
Well, I don't know if I've ever talked to you about this, but I'm interested, of course, in what these substances do to me and to other individuals. But then there's a whole other area, which is what has the impact of substances and drugs been on large populations over long periods of time?
Ooh.
And I'm willing to argue that the evolution of human language and complex cultural forms themselves were caused by disruptions in the ordinary mental functioning of perfectly happy primates about 150,000 years ago. In other words, that the evolution of of complex human culture based on language is actually an effect of brain perturbations and unusual states of consciousness that were eventually assimilated and became part of the behavioral toolkit of early human beings.
So you're saying it's actually a part of, and a continuing part of, evolution itself.
That's right, and the important thing for modern people is a continuing part of. So when you talk about drugs, today we're focusing on the drug of the day, whatever it is, heroin or methadone. But in fact, over the past 1,000 years, it's been drugs that have built the empires that created Western civilization. Sugar, tobacco, alcohol, opium, tea,
coffee,
chocolate. These are the drugs that shaped civilization.
Coffee,
another big one.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, we don't think of these as drugs. We call them foods or whatever we call them, because a drug is a bad thing, a food is a good thing. But eventually, I think people are going to wise up to this racket, and they need to, because we need to educate our children about this complex area of human behavior. There are dangerous drugs. There are drugs that, used carefully, can be a tremendous enhancement of life, but you have to know what you're doing. It's not something you just blunder into, and all generalizations will have exceptions.
And they do, indeed. Recently, as you well know, we have a drug czar. And recently our czar actually came out and made a couple of really remarkable statements. He said that he thought the debate over medical marijuana was now a legitimate one. And he even went further and he said it may well be that the use of marijuana recreationally may be a valid debate for our society to have. And I almost fell on the floor when I heard him say that.
Well, it would be a wonderful thing for Clinton to do, for Gore and the country, to make some headway in the end of this administration on this issue, so that it doesn't all have to be left to the first term of a new Democrat. I mean, how long are we going to dog this matter? It really should be part of the agenda of the new century to make drug suppression a 20th century phenomenon, along with racism, fascism, aerial bombing of civilians, and so forth and so on. As I said, it's a racket. The insurance companies know that people who smoke cannabis are not at greater health risk.
Well, that's a good point, because they always ask whether you smoke. They don't ask whether you smoke pot. They ask whether you smoke cigarettes.
Of course.
They're really concerned about that. In fact, a lot of cases,
they've got the numbers on that.
Yeah, in fact, a lot of cases you can't even get insured if you are a smoker.
But the fact is, cannabis is such an effective stress reducer that whatever effect the tar in it is having on you, it's more than offset by your low blood pressure, excellent digestion, good sleep, and so forth and so on.
Do you think do you think that there will be any progress soon based on the recent statements made? Is there going to be some sort of, even my state, Nevada. Now, Nevada, Terence, it does not look kindly on even marijuana. It is a felony in Nevada. And recently we had a state-wide initiative here in which the people of Nevada said yes to, once again, Terence Mckenna. Terence, in fact, I'm going to be talking to one next week, another brilliant theoretical physicist. I talk frequently with Dr. Michio Kaku. And it is his view that the odds of our making it through to the other side of the discovery and dealing with element 92, that our odds are very, very teeny-weeny indeed. In other words, when any civilization, and there must be many out there, discover element 92 inevitably, almost inevitably, they end up destroying themselves. Any thoughts on that? You think we'll make it through?
Well, I think it's remarkable that we've had atomic weapons for over 50 years now, and they were only used very shortly, within weeks after their perfection. And after that, somehow, in all the wars, revolutions, and posturing that's gone on, we've never resorted to the nuclear option.
Right.
So I would argue that maybe the discovery of the transuranium elements and their properties had a marvelously sobering effect on carnivorous monkeys like ourselves. But I can usually find a silver lining, Art.
Good. Then you may want to find one in the fact that 7 Russian warships are now headed to meet up with and, or in their words, observe what we are doing with regard to the bombing of the Serbs.
Well, you just keep going back to that. I think that's a case of trying to make a purse out of a cow's ear or a sow's ear.
That's right, exactly right. Anyway, I hope that we make it through. I have great doubts.
Well, there are many other challenges. I mean, I'm sure you've probably discussed on your program the Terminator gene.
Oh, yes. Isn't that wonderful?
That's a good one. There's the gray goo scenario of a nanotechnological breakout. There's, you've got Earth changes. I guess we've probably talked about how Alfred North Whitehead said the business of the future is to be dangerous.
Well, we're doing good business. But boy, it's a dangerous world out there right now. It's a really dangerous world. Listen, here's somebody who asks, Art, would you please ask Terence, if the drug DMT, which occurs naturally in our bodies, is released at death, and if it is, could this possibly account for some of the near-death experiences that people report? It's Mike in Houston.
Well, yeah, I think that's a very reasonable suggestion. I first heard that notion put forth from Rupert Sheldrake, and I think he called it a necrotogen, a drug which simulates the symptoms of near death. It certainly is. The near-death experience is a dramatic analog to the DMT experience, but I also think we produce DMT in deep dream states. I would lay money on that. I mean, it's known that it's produced in cerebrospinal fluid at the same time that there's high REM activity in the brain, which usually indicates deep dreaming.
If DMT is indeed the coach that drives NDEs, then what does that tell us, if anything, about what does or does not lie beyond this short mortal life?
Well, I've thought a lot about that. If we take the evidence seriously, the DMT state seems to indicate some kind of hyperdimensional matrix that is actually inhabited by some kind of language-using form of energy that can at least relate to the presence of human beings. I've said maybe these were dead souls, an ecology of souls. This is certainly what shamans would claim.
Dead souls.
If that's true and can be verified by something as simple as a psychoactive drug experience that lasts 15 minutes, then we really, scientifically, at the end of the 20th century, have been looking in all the wrong places. I think we have been looking in all the wrong places, and that the real frontier of science is the human mind and its potential, and we're not going to unlock that till we get over all this queasiness and hand-wringing on the issue of drugs and drug research and drug use and so forth and so on.
Well, I guess you could either view the use of some of these hallucinogenics as a peek at the other side, a peek at what lies beyond the physical, and truly lies beyond the physical. In other words, there are a lot of things that I believe our brains can do, after all, and I think it's Princeton and other prestigious universities. They're proving that the mind can affect random number generators, that we can do that. The proof is quite substantial, actually. But that's something that a conscious mind does. It's not something that a dead mind does. There are many other things that our living minds can do. For example, they can enable us to travel outside our bodies. I did it once. I know now it's true. You can, in effect, be outside your body. But I have not decided yet, Terence, whether that experience represents something that I will find after my mortal existence. Anyway, Terence, look, I did this big build-up, and then the phone went away. I was, I guess, approaching what I know about the conscious mind. I know to be true, and what I wonder about. And, of course, what I wonder about is whether there really is some sort of continuation. What's your view? Terence?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, that was a long pause.
Formulating my thoughts.
No, I understand. On a night like this, long pauses probably mean the power is going out.
Well, I agree that you can't be sure that DMT is showing you the great beyond. It may be showing you the dying brain. It may be taking you to the very edge of death, but that is not death itself.
It may be showing you the great within. That's what it may be showing you.
Yes, and it doesn't settle the metaphysical questions, except it certainly is strong evidence that everything we've been told about entities, about the capacity of the human mind, that things are a good deal more complicated than that. To me, it's the great exception to all rules. What it itself says, other than that all rules have exceptions, I'm not sure.
Terence, if the power were to go out and stay out, I'll pick Honolulu, all right? In Honolulu, that's a big city, close to you. If the power went out and stayed out for a month in Honolulu, what do you think would happen socially?
Well, in any city, I think push would come to shove in a hurry because water pumps would not work, and so the city water supply would be only what was in the pipes, and you can take the scenario from there. I live on an island hundreds of miles from Honolulu, and thankfully so. I'm not a survivalist, at least not consciously, but I've certainly built a system that is redundant, off-grid, wireless, and capable of maintaining itself without any help from anybody else. I'm concerned about people in cities, even if Y2K does not bring the end of the world, in very dense population centers like Tokyo and Manhattan, where simply the number of embedded chips is exponentially high. The possibility of some kind of chain reaction failure is consequently high as well. So I think people should give consideration to moving out of those kinds of areas, even if just temporarily.
Mm-hmm. That's quite a bit of advice. Now, understand that as you dispense that advice, you're being heard right now in in every major city in America, every single major city, New York City, Atlanta, I wouldn't even go through them all, every major city in America, you're speaking to these people, and that's some serious advice you're handing out there.
Well, one of the things on this Y2K thing, Art, and today is an interesting day to discuss it, is it should clarify as we get closer. There are going to be a couple of rollover dates this month, a big rollover date in August. I can't believe that we're just going to slam into the millennial date with half of the population thinking it's the end of the world and half assuring us it's no big deal. Is it not going to become more clear?
I guess it is, but in the end, your advice is, in other words, you think there are going to be problems in cities, and how long do you think that thread of civilization would last? A day? Half a day, 2 days. They did a
72 hours in
72
most
hours.
places.
72 hours.
And then, of course, what the concern is, I suppose, is that the grid will fail in areas where there's bad weather and deep snow, and that it'll be very hard to get it back up and going. I am not an electrical engineer. I don't think anybody who isn't can make an informed judgment on that.
Yeah, I can't. And, I'm accused of being gloom doom about all of this, but I do see what would occur. I think at least I know, frankly, what would occur if we lost our power. There was a movie called The Trigger Effect. Did you ever get to see that? Probably not.
I didn't.
It really shows how quickly civilization would deteriorate if the power went off and people began to conclude it wasn't going to come on anytime soon. And people reverted to early animal states rather quickly, a matter of days, as you just said.
Well, all these disaster scenarios raise the opportunity for people to imagine that civilization will just slide out from under us. I went through a flood in Northern California years ago where the power was off for 6.5 days, and it did.
Once again, Terence Mckenna, we'll just have to keep getting him back as the power glitches. And we can handle it either way, but what we're getting, Terence, are these short little ba-boom type breaks, and when that happens, my phone system goes, goodbye, everybody. It's absolutely amazing. I'm getting a good lesson tonight. I'm getting a really good lesson tonight. So, anyway, Y2K. So you think, as I do, that you simply aren't going to predict what will happen, but are pretty sure what will happen socially if it does happen.
Well, and here in Hawaii, we're at the end of the time for the day, so it will have happened in 22 time zones before it gets here. So we'll have a notion of it if it's rolling toward us.
Yeah, I guess that's right. So what do you plan to do, by the way, on New Year's Eve?
Well, go to a party, of course.
Really? You're going to go to a party, really?
Well, fortunately, the party is only about 3 miles away. I assume I can fight my way back here in the confusion afterwards.
Did you know, Terence, the Communist Chinese government has ordered all of the management personnel of all of the airlines to be in the air in a Chinese aircraft flying the 31st into the 1st. An interesting... Why, you say?
Yes.
Well, I think twofold. One, to give the people of China confidence that their airplanes will be safe. And two, if they're not safe, then there won't be any concern about the management personnel who were on the flights. They'll have a whole new regime. But that is true. They're doing that, Terence. Hold on.
These old socialist ways linger on.
That's right.